This tutorial explains how to cut off the highest values from a plot in the R programming language. So without too much talk, let's dive into the R code. In this video I will show you several examples, and all of these examples are based on the data frame that we can create with lines 2 and 3 of the code. So if you run these lines of code, you can see at the top right of RStudio that a new data frame is appearing, which is called data. And we can have a look at the first 6 rows of this data frame using the head function, as you can see in line 4 of the code. So if you run this line of code, you can see at the bottom in the RStudio console that our data contains one column which is called X, and this column contains random numeric values. Now let's assume that we want to draw these data in the R programming language, and let's also assume that we want to cut off the highest 5% of our values. Then we first need to apply the code that you can see in line 6. And in this line of code I'm using the sort function, the round function and the length function to cut off the highest 5% of our values, and I'm specifying that by using the number 0.95. So if you run line 6 of the code, you can see that a new data object is appearing at the top right, which is called cut95. And we can print this value to the bottom in the RStudio console by running line 7 of the code. And then you can see that we have created a data object containing only one value, which is 1.667. And this value is actually the cutoff value, which cuts off the highest 5% of the values in our data frame column. In the next step, we also need to install and load the ggplot2 package, because I want to draw a ggplot2 plot where I'm cutting off the highest values in this tutorial. So in order to do that, we first need to install and load the ggplot2 package, as you can see in lines 9 and 10. I have installed this package already, so for that reason I'm just going to load it with line 10 of the code. And after running this line of code, we are able to use the functions of the ggplot2 package, such as ggplot and geom_density. And in this case, I'm also using the geom_vline function to draw a red line to our plot, which identifies our cutoff value. So if you run lines 12 to 14 of the code, you can see at the bottom right of RStudio that a new plot has been created. And as you can see, this plot shows a density of our data in our column X of our data frame data. And you can see that we have added a vertical line to this plot, which is showing the cutoff value. So all the values on the right side of this red line correspond to the highest 5% in our data. Similar to this density plot, we can also draw a histogram, which is defining the highest 5% in our data, as you can see in lines 16 to 18 of the code. So in lines 16 and 18, I'm using basically the same syntax as in the previous plot. However, this time I'm specifying that I want to draw a histogram using the geom_histogram function. So if you run lines 16 to 18 of the code, you can see at the bottom right that another plot is created. And as you can see, this time we have drawn a histogram. However, you can also see that we have again added this red line at our cutoff value. So all the values on the right side of this red line correspond to the highest 5% of values in our data. So in these first 2 plots, I have explained how to add a red line to our plot to indicate the cutoff value for the highest 5% of data points in our data. However, it's also possible to remove these values entirely from our plot, and this is what I'm showing in the next 2 plots in this tutorial. So before we can draw our data once again, we need to subset our data frame data. And this time I'm specifying that I want to keep only those values in our data frame that are smaller or equal to our cutoff value that we have stored in the data object cut95. And then I'm storing the output of this in a new data frame object, which is called data95. So if you run line 20 of the code, you can see that another data frame is appearing at the top right, which is called data95. And this data frame contains only those values that correspond to the lower 95% of values in our data set. In the next step, in lines 22 and 23, I can use this data frame to draw a density plot. So if you run these lines of code, you can see at the bottom right that another density plot is created. This time this density plot is not showing a red line. However, you can see that we have removed all the data points on the right side of the cutoff value. And similar to that, we can also draw a histogram based on our data of the lowest 95%, as you can see in lines 25 and 26. So if you run these lines of code, you can see that another histogram is created, which is showing only the lowest 95% of data points in our data. That's all I wanted to explain in this video. In case you want to learn more on this topic, you may check out my homepage, statisticsglobe.com, because on my homepage I have recently published a tutorial in which I'm explaining the content of this video in some more detail. I will put a link to this tutorial into the description of the video, so you can find it there. If you have liked this video or if you have any questions, let me know in the comments section below. I'll try to respond to all comments as soon as I can. Furthermore, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel to get notified about future video releases. I have already published about 500 videos on this channel and I'm releasing new videos on a daily basis. Thanks a lot for watching. See you in the next video.